ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests. It's an honor to be your co-moderator today. My name is Beverly Abakoba Oyejiania, and I'm from Nigeria. And I welcome you all to the second edition of the Africa Intellectual Property Town Hall, the end of year Town Hall. And the theme for this Town Hall is making IP work for Africa and Africans. And we all know how topical this is. And I really expect and hope that there'll be a lot of engaging and stimulating discourse. So just want to go through a couple of things with you. First of all, some housekeeping. Please remember that you can post your questions during the course of the discussion in the chat box and in the Q&A box as well. There will be a panel discussion with our brilliant expert panelists and discussants. I'll be introducing the panelists in a short moment. So if you want to, make sure you don't lose any of your interesting questions or contributions, make sure you leave those in the Q&A box. There will be time for Q&A after the panelists have had their opportunity to present their points, discussions, etc. on the topic. So now I'm going to introduce to you all the panelists that we're going to be hearing from today. And I'm really, really excited because these are people that I've interacted with over the course of the year. And it's so great to be able to actually hear from them for the first time today. So our first panelist is Jerry Gitonga. And Jerry Gitonga is an advocate of the High Court of Kenya. And he has experience in law firm management, managing a legal aid center, and advocating for recognition and protection of human rights in Kenya. His practical skills include advocacy, legal education and awareness, and litigation. His specialties are copyright law, entertainment and trademark law, media and broadcasting, telecoms, and one of my personal favorites, sports law and public policy formulation. He's currently general counsel at the Akili Kids, Kenya, and it's the region's first free-to-air television station for children. So it's a pleasure to have you with us, Mr. Gitonga. Next, we have Mr. Simbarashe Makahamazde, and he is the principal consultant of Palladium IP Consultants and is also the founder of All Things IP Africa and executive director of IPLA. He's also sitting on the international panel of parliamentarians advancing Africans in IP. So you're welcome. He has over 12 years of intellectual property management and strategy experience, covering Southern Africa and the Middle East. He advises his clients on all aspects of IP, property protection, and management, including, but not limited to, trademarks, patent filing strategies, trademark brand selection, IP filing and prosecution, and also IP strategy, IP commercialization, institution IP policy development, and IP due diligence. His experience covers a large breadth of companies, as well as startups, assisting them to establish IP protection strategies at an earlier stage. Simba has also handled IP consulting projects in Dubai for private sector and semi-government institutions, covering IP audits, policy development, training. As you can hear that these are very, very experienced professionals. Now, I'm going to go on to Dr. Titilayo Adebola, my Nigerian sister. And she is the theme coordinator for IP law and an associate director at the Center for Commercial Law at the University of Aberdeen in the UK. Her research and teaching interests broadly include intellectual property law, international economics law, and food law. Very interesting. She's an editor on Afronomics Law, a leading blog on international economic law issues as they relate to Africa and the global South. And she's also the founder of Flora IP, a specialist blog on food, agriculture, and intellectual property law. And you know how big we are on food and protecting our various local food. So that should be very interesting hearing from her. Dr. Adebola has a recent publication on mapping Africa's complex regimes towards an Africa-centered Intellectual Property Protocol. She's received her LLM and PhD from the University of Warwick. Now, moving on to Mike Strano. Nice to have you here with us, Mike. He is the founding director of FAT Music and Entertainment Limited. For 22 years, Mike Strano has continuously explored music business of Africa. He is honestly, really, really good at what he does. I've heard a lot of conversations and a lot of his advocacy. He's really, really the real deal. And since moving to Eastern Africa, Australia, back in 1998, Mike and his family have built one of the best-known entertainment companies in Business Daily and KPMG, listing at number 36 of the top 100 mid-sized businesses in Kenya. Now, he also has another enterprise called ONGEA Africa, which stands for which represents the Eastern Africa Music Summit. And it completed its 5th edition in February, and it aims to develop the industry to make it more professional, transparent, and profitable. ONGEA was created after 10 successful years of Kenya Music Week from 2004 to 2013. Another business also includes Fat Buzz, which is a monthly publication since 2000, which also supplies content daily to Safaricom's SMS service. Thank you for putting your business website over there so people can check it out. He also specializes in talent and runs Magic Africa, which is a proud affiliate that creates world-class magical experiences for events throughout Africa, from Cape Town to Cairo. And last but not the least, he's also the founding director of My Movies Africa, a Kenyan digital cinema extension that brings world movies to Africa. In 2017, Mike Strano became one of the founding board members of Music Publishers Association of Kenya, MPAKE, which was approved by the Kenya's Copyright Board for the collection and distribution of royalties on behalf of authors, composers, and publishers. So you can see that we have quite an array of very, very experienced and well-versed practitioners and business people in IP. And we also have Sand Mbakalu, who is the convener of this event, and he's very well known as well. He's an international trade and investment expert for the African market with over 15 years of professional experience working in complex multicultural environments. He's also the convener of Africa IP, which we've all come to know and love. And it sits under the platform of the International Trade and Research Center. And he is the current executive director of the Africa International Trade and Commerce Research, an international trade firm for the Africa market. He's played many lead roles in business development, conferences, keynote presentations, consultancy and research. And he's currently the national leader for the implementation of a geographical indication bill for Nigeria. So, I mean, Sand is just brilliant. We all know him and love him well. My co-moderator, Muriel, I will allow her introduce herself, but she's also brilliant. And on that note, I'll hand over to Muriel. Thank you so much, and please enjoy the rest of the presentation. Thank you.
Okay, now it's my turn. So, distinguished invited. So anybody? Oh, sorry. Good afternoon, good day to everybody to joining us. Now we have to. Beverly, she has well introduced the conference. It's my turn to let you talk. So what is maybe, sorry, I forget something. Send, okay, what is the term? It's, let me, sorry, I was my note.
Okay. Yeah, that is fine, Marilee. So I have to just give the opening statement, outlining why we are here today.
We are here today to talk about intellectual property in Africa, for African, all over the world. And you have to include the 6th area in the world, the 6th African area, because I know they are there. So I welcome to us. And we had to talk about many things. We had to talk about some recommendation. We had to talk about the structure, anything we can help African people all over the world to improve the intellectual property, about our management, about anything, about our job, about the structure, anything.
So. All right, thank you very much, Marilyn. Marilyn, she's based in France, so basically we permit her to even speak French because we have audience that are here that are French speaking, and that's why the diasporan community, the 6th continent, that the diasporan community, we must acknowledge them. And we have about 3 of people here, or 4 that are of diasporan community. We have the sons and daughters of Africa that are here. So Mike, thank you very much for joining us today. Basically, I must say good afternoon, because in Nigeria it's afternoon. Some part of Africa, I think it's somehow morning. And good evening to everyone that have decided to join us in this 2nd edition of African Intellectual Property End of the Year Week. Please permit me to salute once again the eminent sons and daughters of Africa that have agreed to gather today for us to assess, discuss, and provide recommendations on how we can make IP work for Africans and Africa. So I salute my colleagues and friends. Before I start, I want to recite an African proverb, to be specific, an Igbo proverb that says, at times one needs to stop everything he or she is doing, sit by him or herself, and mend his or her broken wings. What this means is this end of the year town hall meeting is the African way of people gathering with elders. Permit me to call the panelists appointed chiefs that gather to assess what is going on in the community, to be able to provide solution, hearing from every member. Most times when there is a town hall meeting, the young ones, the old ones gather to talk about their issues, to be able to bring up something that will better the community. In this context, we are trying to take stock of what has happened 2021. We did this last year in the midst of COVID-19. We are still within COVID-19. What has happened within the intellectual property ecosystem, and what solutions has been provided? What have we done as individuals? What have we done as organizations? We're all aware the primary function of intellectual property rights. It is a law. It is a right to protect persons, innovations from exploitation. The world as we know it has since evolved in terms of knowledge and innovation. The need to find newer solutions as well as to fine-tune existing processes has led to the emergence of several new products, technologies, ideas, and creativity. To reap the benefits of their innovations, interventions, creators, business people, artists, scientists, thinkers, they have learned to protect their idea according to law. The legal law guarantees authorities, give us rights with the authority to have exclusive rights on our creativity. The importance of intellectual property rights in the current global economy can never and cannot be overemphasized, because it has contributed immensely to national economy, which Africa has not benefited from. I will ask the technical people to share my slide, please, because it will put into context of why we need to be having this yearly conversation. For example, registered patent, trademark, and copyright globally have substantially improved from 189% to 223% to 388% respectively between 2016 to 1996 to 2016. In all this, how many percent has African benefit contributed to? Just less than 2%. And it's even becoming worse. Because currently in 2020, intellectual property registration globally went up to 24,862,910 according to WIPO. But guess what is the registration from Africa? 1.1% of 24 million. And bear in mind that Africa is the 6th largest population. I mean, it's almost like we have the highest young people in the world. Africa has the highest number of young people in the world that are innovative, creative. But how come we are not being represented in the intellectual property ecosystem? You can check this out across board. Be it geographical indication, be it pattern and design, we are not represented. So some of the things this advocacy aims to achieve is to advocate against fragmented IP system in Africa. For example, we understand that the ECOWAS does not have a specialized IP system as a bloc. Bearing in mind that all members of ECOWAS member states are part of TRIPS, and we're also, almost all, are part of OAPI or ARIPO. But within this, even with this membership, we're not still getting what we want. Also, there is also the purpose status. We don't know where it is now. There was no discussion under the AU platform in 2021, to the best of my knowledge, where PIPO was discussed. Ladies and gentlemen, we also have the African modern law that is anchored on the principle of balanced regional and sub-regional and national law in Africa to cater to stakeholder divergence needs in IP. What is the current status? As Africans, we can't continue having systems that are not working. We want to really see if they work. As I've said earlier on, Africa is a continent that has 54 to 55, it depends on who is counting, countries, independent countries. Yet, we are not benefiting from intellectual property. It is really sad and heartbroken that African IP system is so fragmented and that has a strong colonial connotation and cannot deliver the much needed value to Africans and Africa. This argument is based on the continental drivers of IP infrastructure, which is the two regional organizations promoting intellectual property rights in Africa. One of them is African Regional Intellectual Property Organization, based in Harare, has about 20 member countries. While we have the OAPI, that's the Organization for Intellectual Property, African Organization for Intellectual Property, which has 17 members. ARIPO has mostly English speaking. OAPI has mostly French speaking. This is the divide we must address in the 21st century. We must address this divide, even while within these two regional bodies, the three major powerhouses in Africa, Nigeria, South Africa, are not members of any of these regional bodies, which is also something we must be able to address. I hope this town hall meeting will provide some solution to this. The third thing we must be able to see and maybe work on is strengthening the accessibility of registration of IP in Africa. Leaders of Africa continent should realize that IP system should be accessible because it boosts innovation, connectivity, trade, and investment. Because, for example, in South Africa, there is an average of 900 patent applications filed each month. However, 60% to 70% of these applications are filed by non-South African firms and companies. If Africa has to industrialize, we must increase this. And how do we increase this? We must make it accessible. African Union must revisit the idea of Pan-African Intellectual Property Organization because today we don't know what is going on. We will also talk about the enforcement part of this, of IP. Because of the weak system we have, enforcement has been weak. and which has given rise to high online and offline piracy and increased the issue of counterfeit goods in Africa. Without this legal enforcement, manufacturers and developers, creators, thinkers cannot be motivated to be innovative in Africa. I am based in Nigeria. I'm based in Abuja, to be specific. It beats my heart. My heart breaks anytime I drive through and I see pirated books, films, music. They reign supreme. We also see many fake products with marks, imitations, and trademarks of genuine manufacturers across the continent. We're calling for this town hall meeting to be able to say, how do we address this? Recently, the issue of exclusion of Africa in COVID-19 vaccine distribution, which has given rise to the call for compulsory licensing, an ongoing contentious issue in providing vaccine against COVID-19 for Africans. For those that might not be aware or might not be knowledgeable about this, compulsory licensing is a mechanism through which third parties are allowed to use patent invention without the patentee permission. TRIPS agreement allows this. It permits it under Article 6. However, the multinational corporations are always against this. We saw this during the HIV period. It's still up there, but we saw this opposition, and it's still happening. We cannot say much, but I want to say this. Africa has a lot of traditional knowledge and traditional medicine that can be able to solve some world problem. But for us to do this, we must put our house in order. We must ensure that intellectual property work for Africa and African and the global world. It's not all gloom and doom. Despite the major flaws and challenges faced by Africans, intellectual property system, African economy is still focused on determining on how to improve policies and framework for this. All of us in this room, all of us in this platform, on this platform, are doing one thing or the other to ensure we change the narrative, we make Africa bloom, we create opportunity, we institutionalize our traditional knowledge. This town hall meeting, I believe, will substantially highlight emerging trend in African IP, especially to offer solution on how, for example, how we can make an African woman that has created a food recipe, document it and protect his idea and convert it into a potential bankable asset. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished personalities of African continent and beyond, and friends of Africa, I must say, I welcome you to the second edition of the African Intellectual Property End of the Year Town Hall Meeting. The objective is to assess IP system in Africa for the last 1 year and provide recommendation on how we can make IP work for Africans and Africa. Thank you very much for having me. Good afternoon. Over to you, Madam Moderator. You are muted.
Okay, thank you. Do you hear me now? Do you hear me?
Yes,
okay.
Loud and clear.
Okay, so thank you, Sam, for explanation. Very well, very clear. Now I will have some question to Mr. Jerry. Mr. Jerry is there? Are you?
Yes,
is there?
Yes,
okay.
I am.
Okay. 2021 has been an interesting year of the world and Africa. How could we assess intellectual property in Africa as it is related to management and utilization of IP as a tool for development from our perspective?
Sorry, I didn't catch that. May I request you
again? 2021 has been an interesting year of the world and Africa. How will you assess intellectual property in Africa as it is related to management and utilization of IP as a tool for development from our perspective.
Okay. I think I've got your question.
Yeah.
So and thank you very much for having me in this town hall. It's a real privilege for me. I'm very grateful. Yeah. So when I was thinking about this, participating here today, I thought maybe I could put on my cap of someone who has worked in civil society, pursuing issues of human rights, and also someone who has worked in government.
Sorry, is it normal that you are in the dark?
Pardon?
We don't see you very well. You are in the dark.
Oh, okay. I don't know how I can do this.
The background, yeah. Okay, no problem. Continue. You have 10 minutes, I think.
Okay, let me just push. Maybe this will help.
You can continue to talk. Okay, no problem. Continue. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, so I think one of the ways we can do this is, we need to, first of all, acknowledge the role of IP in the national development of any country, not just in Africa, but generally. I think Sand has shared some really good information about the status of registrations in Africa and where we have come from in the last 4 years. It is not denied that there is a direct correlation between successful economies around the world and registrations of IP works. So it's very important, and I think that's one good way of one good place to start when you are assessing the status or the state of IP in Africa. I think even though there has been growth in this area, maybe with the IP registrations, I think we are still lagging behind, as a continent, and this is reflecting also in the way our economies are working out, and I think that we need to find a way of enhancing issues of increasing information and ways of communicating IP issues and educating the people. And by people, I mean everybody, not just IP practitioners, but also people in government, ordinary citizens who interact with the IP on a daily basis. So I think for me, that's one way we can enhance the positive impact that IP can have on the country, but also the lack of effective information and communication and education on these issues, for me, is one way of assessing where we are as Africans in terms of the way we are handling our IP, both in the public sector and in the private sector. Yeah, so that's one of my thoughts. The other thing maybe I would like to say is on a practical way forward. When I worked as I said, I worked in the government, and I set up the legal department at an organization called the Kenya Film Commission, which was set up by the government of Kenya as a state corporation to address issues of ensuring that film becomes a viable enterprise in Kenya for Kenyans, and also to increase Kenya's viability as a filming destination for filmmakers from around the world. So one of the things I realized is that there was this issue of lack of information was a very big problem for a lot of the filmmakers we were dealing with, and also within the government itself, that we had a situation where we are in government, but key government departments and agencies and officials are not aware, first of all, of the commission, or even if they were aware, they were not really clear as to who we were or what role film, which is a subset of intellectual property, could play in the development of the country. So, I mean, one of the things we had to do then, what happened now with that is that reflected also in the way the government was funding the commission. So when I joined in 2008, we were having, I think the budget we had was like enough to pay salaries and administrative expenses. So one of the things we had to do in order to be able to address the issues of address the objectives we had been given by the statutes that set up the commission, is we needed more money. And to do that, we realized we had to look for statistics, we had to look for information, we had to look for all these facts and data, so that we could go and talk to the government officials in Treasury and in our parent ministry, so that they could understand what we needed to also give us money to do that. And the time we were with our lobbying, which took about 5 months, when the next cycle came, the next budgeting cycle came for the government, we were given times for what we had received the previous year. So for me, the lesson there was just how important informing people is, just how important it is to effectively communicate what IP can do for people, and then educating the people.
Okay, thank you. So what I will understood that we have to improve the IP skills about the citizen, about anybody else, and to improve the structure about what we have to build and what we have to, and how we have to use the IP. Correct? Anything else? Mr. Jerry, are you still there? Okay. So I think I lose Mr. Jerry, so I will like Mr. Simba to answer to you. It's your turn. Go ahead, please. Mr. Simba.
Thank you very much, Mireli, and thank you, Africa International Trade and Commerce Research, for setting up this. Well, I mean, look, for starters, I want to respond to the statistics that Mr. Sant alluded to. Really, they paint that a gloomy picture of really the situation in the continent. But however, I want to respond to that on a positive note, and of course to throw in a few questions that some of the panelists will then consider. So number one, I want to take you guys back to the origins of the, before I talk about the statistics, I want to take you to the origins of the WIPO Intergovernmental Committee and the rationale under which it was published. One of the most important aspects was that it was part of a larger and structured endeavor by WIPO to move towards modern responsive IP system that could embrace non-Western forms of creativity and innovation, which is the stronghold of Africa, because it's part of that non-Western aspect. So we are looking at issues around access to genetic resources, benefit sharing, protection of traditional knowledge, and Africa is really strong on that, protection of expressions of folklore, and Africa, again, is really strong on that. Now, if we go back to the statistics, looking at that system, that IP system, which was initially conceived without Africa in mind, are the metrics that we are using to measure innovative activity in Africa correct? Are they suitable for Africa? Do they fully address the type of innovation and IP that is contextual to Africa? So for me, those statistics, they are really important to guide us in terms of decision making and to guide us in terms of policy making, but they are not fully indicative of the innovative activity that is currently happening in Africa. And Africa is growing, Africa is innovating. Now, if we come to patterns, I remember having this conversation about a month ago with fellow experts, that patterns, we need to differentiate between patterns and innovation. Because patterns, which is the legal right, the title, is it evidence of innovation or is evidence of an invention? So if we measure that and we look at how Africa is performing using those, that framework and metrics, it might be really difficult to come with a clear picture. Then again, looking at that global perspective in terms of statistics and obviously the technological progress and innovation in Africa, the specific tools that being used to measure that, they don't really fit into the continent. So at the end of the day, we are doing well, but the framework, I feel that the framework that is being used, it's not really good and suitable for Africa. That's number one. Number two, the issue of data reporting in the continent. It's again another aspect that we need to look into closely. Those statistics are coming from, we're looking at a maximum of 32 to 34 countries from the African continent. And we do have more than 20, we would say 20 or 21 that are not included in those statistics. So again, it speaks to the picture that those statistics paint in terms of Africa. Then another point is that, look, intellectual property comes out of that investment in research and development. Now, if we look at the 2014 African Union Science, Technology and Innovation Strategy for 2024, right now we are closing 2021. We are almost completing that decade. But if we look at the initial desire or the initial plan of looking at least having 1% of gross domestic product of each African country as the desired minimum expenditure on research and development, has that happened? Has any African country done that yet? The answer is none, right? The top ranking countries probably will look at South Africa with 0.83 and Egypt with 0.72, right? That's so, which means for the past close to 10 years, as Africans, we have failed to dedicate that kind of amount of our gross domestic product to research and development. Now, this is where intellectual property comes from. This is where the patterns that we are talking about come from. If we are looking at those countries with utility model systems, this is where that IP comes from that research and development. And we are not investing that much in that space. So at the end of the day, it also feeds into the results that SEND was presenting. Of course, there's a whole cocktail of factors to be considered, but I do believe that when we say the IP system, I for one will always advocate for not the conventional but one that is African, one that speaks to us, one that speaks to our continent. Look, guys, we don't need to be so radical about it, but the conventional IP system that we are using as a yardstick for measuring what we are doing in the continent was created without the continent in mind, right? So those are some of the issues to address. I've got other points, but definitely I will throw it to other speakers so that we continue with the engagement, we continue with the conversation. But I really felt it was important to respond to the statistics that appear not to paint a really great picture of our continent, which to me is not the case. The continent is super innovative, but we are innovating to solve our problems. We are innovating to and providing solutions that are contextual to our continent. And the yardstick that is being used is not about our continent. So I'll end there, then we can always discuss with others and keep throwing in more points.
Okay, thank you. So I understand that the problem is the culture of IP for Africa and African people, and the other side is what about to money, because to submit a patent mean a lot of money, and where the startup manager will have this money. So, and we have no structure enough to respond to IP, because Africa is a land of innovation, of creation, as you talked, but we don't have the mindset like Europe, China, or USA. And sometimes they make some little session to the public citizen to train them how you have to use the IP, but it's not managed in Africa. So we have to include that in the future. Are you correct with me, Mr. Simba?
Yes, I mean, that's an important point that you also raise in terms of I think I got the cost issue in terms of IP protection in Africa. Again, if I am to speak to that, I will speak from a practitioner point of view, and then probably from a policy point of view. So if you look at Africa, I've worked in Africa and outside Africa. Much of the work that we have been doing in Africa, more than 90% of those IP filings and the IP work is coming out of from out of the continent. And if you look at the rates of most practitioners, those rates are specific to those clients who are outside the continent. Now, what does that do to the startup in Nigeria, to the startup in Zimbabwe, to the startup in Uganda? They cannot afford that. They cannot pay those fees to protect their innovation. And mind you, most of that innovation doesn't meet that high standard. I mean, the patentability requirement, that high standard that is global, when their innovation is, is continental and contextual. Then I want to also give you an example of, I've had a chance to, yeah, sure. I've had a chance to look at what India has done. They've a full understanding of the contribution of startups and SMEs in their economy, which exactly is the same situation in Africa. But as a continent, what have we done about it? India took significant steps towards promoting innovation within the country and creation of a dynamic and balanced intellectual property system with particular focus on encouraging startups and SMEs. In their action plan for 2016, they established legal support and facilitation for IP registration for startups. What the government did was actually to fund those service providers who are doing services for startups to register their IP. They had to create a fund to pay those service providers. What that meant was that those startups were only paying government fees to register a trademark. They're only paying the statutory fees to file a patent. right? So this is a government that is making efforts around funding their SMEs, which are the core of the economy. So it's again something that we are not really doing as a continent. Where our SMEs, do we have policies that are friendly to those SMEs and to drive and protect their specific innovation?
Thank you so much. Now I will give the turn to Dr. Titilayao. Dr. Titilayao, it's your turn.
Thank you very much, Muriel. Thank you very much, Mr. Sand, for organizing this, and to the excellent work of the Africa International Trade and Commerce Research. I think this is an important gathering and conversation we're having, where we're connecting different stakeholders to have a discussion around the state of our intellectual property rights in Africa. So we are connecting academics with policymakers, with practitioners, civil society organizations, to hear firsthand what has been happening in intellectual property over the year on the continent, and ways forward to promote sustainable, effective intellectual property systems that would be beneficial to Africa. So I would stand on existing protocols and also appreciate the contributions of my fellow panelists. I would say that I totally agree with them. I totally agree with the interventions and sort of the points of views and perspectives on how intellectual property is working at the moment in Africa. So Mr. Sand raised pertinent points around numbers, data on the intellectual property contributions of Africa to the international legal sort of registration framework. And Mr. Simba provided, I think, a powerful sort of reaction to that with regard to how that data was generated, and perhaps some of the blind spots and some of the marginalizations of the type of innovation and creativity on the continent, which I totally agree with. And I would also say your framing of the conversation is spot on for me as well. So you asked questions about the scope and the lens through which innovation and creativity is conceptualized. And you said that while we African stakeholders and innovators and creators might not have contributed to the mainstream forms of intellectual property as we have at the international level, they are still engaging in innovation and creativity, and they are still working on circulating, disseminating that, and they have their own informal systems of protection, which might not align with the mainstream types of registration that we would have in our conventional intellectual property offices, but we should not overlook the types of developments that are ongoing. So some examples would have, for example, Nigeria, we have the Nollywood industry, and we have an industry that has thrived outside mainstream conventional copyright systems. So it was the opposite. So when you're having conversations about copyright, you say stronger copyright systems helps to incentivize innovation and encourage creativity in the movie industry. However, we saw that actually piracy was helping to build our movie industry, our Nollywood sector. So we had pirates that were actually working on circulating these movies, and Nollywood became a phenomenon that was beyond Nigeria. So we had other African countries watching Nigerian movies, and we had countries outside the continent. Now, when Nollywood has established itself to a position that I think is firmly entrenched in our global conversations about movies and music, we now have the industry calling for copyright, calling for stronger copyright systems. So we see a reverse of the case, that they started with open systems, and now they're at the stage where they can ask for extended stronger copyright systems. We see the introduction of Nollywood movies, Netflix. Now you're seeing contracts around copyright and the enforcement of copyright systems at a point where Nollywood is comfortable with protecting its systems. Now, when many of the movies are released, we see that they are premiered in movies, in theaters, in cinemas, in Nigeria and outside the continent. You see movies like, you know, some of the popular movies that have come out in the past year, you see them on Netflix as well. And there would have been copyright structures in place. So I would agree with Mr. Simba that there might be a system where we first have to understand our form of creativity, innovation, then think about how we can develop that on national, sub-regional, regional levels in ways that suit us before we begin to think about how to engage with the intellectual property systems that we have. So this phenomenon has been described as kicking away the ladder. So we have some other jurisdictions that did the same. So for example, there is a common saying that in the United States, after the last rail track was laid, they introduced their patent system. So they wanted open systems first to grow. And when they got to the state where they were comfortable, they then introduced the patent system. And now the United States is one of the strongest countries that is pushing for strong intellectual property rights systems. We see China as well. China did not join the World Trade Organization initially in 1994, 1995 when it entered into force. China first settled on building its economy. And when it was, we have the popular sort of conversations about piracy in China, right? But now China is asking for stronger intellectual property systems because it has built its economic and also its infrastructure. And so we have different countries that have established their own forms of growth, and they have engaged with intellectual property in ways that best suits them. So I wouldn't say intellectual property rights should be suited to the contextual realities in our countries, rather than the opposite, where you place intellectual property as a priority, the mainstream intellectual property as a priority, and you always want to aspire to higher standards. That might not be the way that growth would occur in your home countries. Now, we have other examples of innovation across the continent. So, for example, in Nigeria, we have the Yabacon Valley. So last year, I had some empirical research with two of my colleagues on technology development in Yabacon Valley, and we were just really impressed by the rate of technology startups that we had in the country. So we had different platforms, people working on residential apartments, people working on food, people working on transportation, logistics, all types of impressive technologies that were being developed in Yabacon Valley. Now, and then we also had affiliations. So they had affiliations with some external sort of investors. The question that we asked was about intellectual property rights, and many of them actually first started with building their businesses. So for them, their priority was to ensure that their businesses were going to be resilient, that their businesses were going to succeed. So that was their first place. And after that, then they could think about intellectual property rights. And in reality, it was the investors, many times the external international investors, that asked about intellectual property. So out of, let's say, about 30 startups that we had conversations with, we had only about 3 or 4 that had intellectual property frameworks in place at the initial stages, because the overarching sort of position for them was they wanted to first see if their business was viable before thinking about intellectual property rights. We also have in Kenya, the Silicon Savannah, and you see a thriving technology ecosystem there as well, where you see young entrepreneurs developing their own forms of innovation, like Mr. Simba has said, in ways that would respond to the needs that we had in Kenya. And intellectual property might not be the first step for them to consider. So we have some conversations about cultures and ways of protecting innovation that might be outside mainstream intellectual property systems. So for example, we might have name and shame, where people in a particular sector or industry know that this person, one particular inventor was the one that started this, and they respect that person. So it might not be because the person has protected the invention, but because they all know the history and origin, and that is a way of protecting. And then when that sort of product develops, the inventor might decide. Actually, we had some, during our empirical research, we had some inventors that said, you know what, if people copy us, then we know that we're doing something good. And we'll be happy for them to copy us because we know they cannot do it as well as we can. So we have the master plan and they can't do it. But if they are copying us, then there's something to be learned about that. That means that we're doing it well and we're going to keep improving. And when the time comes for us to ask to register our intellectual property rights, we will do that. So I just wanted to raise and reiterate the point made by Mr. Simba to say I totally agree with him. And I think that we should be thinking about our own ways of innovation and creativity and our own ways of protection. Then also we have these forms of intellectual property rights that have been on the margins, but are very beneficial to Africa. So Mr. Sand has been leading excellent work on geographical indications, which I think is one of our strengths in Africa. We have a plethora of products that we can protect, food, agricultural, textile products, handicrafts that we can protect. So we can use the tool of the colonial authorities to our advantage, right? So even though we were not at the table when intellectual property rights were conceptualized, we can actually use the tools that have been constructed to our advantage by prioritizing the types of creativity and innovation that we have. So geographical indications is one that Africa, I think, should embrace. And here we are also aware that geographical indication systems do not just thrive in the absence of other factors. So branding, marketing, we also have other socio-economic factors that would be relevant. So tourism, for example, we have to be sure that our countries are safe, that we have transportation networks. We have to have all of this in place to ensure that our geographical indication systems work. But I think that geographical indications would be one of the strong points that we should work on. We have traditional knowledge as well. We have traditional cultural expressions. So recently I've been in conversations and I've been doing some work on our artifacts. So we know globally that there has been a renaissance, a call for the return of artifacts, Benin bronzes, to Nigeria and to other African countries as well. We've seen Francophone colonial authorities returning artifacts to different Francophone countries are on the continent as well. So here we see the role of traditional cultural expressions. And for me, one of the high points from this exercise of return of our artifacts and arts to Africa is I realized just the sophistication of our technologies in the 12th 13th, 14th centuries, in pre-colonial times, we developed these artifacts that are now world prized, that countries around the world are seeking to display them in their museums and they don't want to return it. And I wonder, how did those bronzesmiths, how did they work on those bronzes at that time with the limited technologies that they have? And those bronzes have stayed, they have remained outstanding, and the sort of what the artists now globally are still researching on how they develop those bronzes. And that's why they're still keeping them. The British Museum has refused to return our Benin bronzes, and they're holding on to it, saying that they want to keep it in custody for humanity. Why is that? It's because of the level of sophistication of our bronzesmiths at the time. And I know that we still have that amount, that knowledge, we still have that sophistication in creation. And I think those are the types of works that we should be protecting. They should be coming to Africa to view these works, these arts and artifacts in our museums. That is what we are contributing to the world place. So let's hold on patent. So you're talking about, let's hold on. We have our own types of works that we can prioritize. Africa should be the hub of tourism because you can see all types of art artifacts all around the continent. So in Francophone Africa, the types of art might be different. In Anglophone Africa, the types of art might be different, but they are all beautiful. They are all creative. So I would say the prioritization of our traditional knowledge, our traditional cultural expressions, our geographical indications, these and our own forms of or our own responses to patents, copyright, industrial designs, this should be the ways that we build our own intellectual property, infrastructure, architecture, regimes in ways that best suit our own types of innovation and creativity. And lastly, I'll just talk about just our education system. I'm impressed and pleased about this platform that we have. So, Mr. Sand, I think you're doing a brilliant job in ensuring the dissemination of intellectual property knowledge. And I can see that many young people are interested in intellectual property rights. And I think that these should be encouraged. So in our universities, intellectual property rights should be a compulsory course where and it should be interdisciplinary, where students from all sort of disciplines can learn about intellectual property. So engineering, pharmacy students, medical students, food technology students, agriculture students can all learn about the role intellectual property laws play, and that can perhaps help in building their own sort of innovation platforms. And just finally, I would say that interaction between the different stakeholders, our policymakers, and Mr. Sand is also doing a brilliant job with this. I know that you're working with ministries of industry, trade and commerce, Ministry of Agriculture, for example, in Nigeria. And I think that this should be reflected in other countries so that we bring together just the different actors involved in the different types of intellectual property. And hopefully we can then sort of model our own type of intellectual property, where the world will come to Africa to learn about how intellectual property can be developed in a contextual, on a contextual basis. I think I'll stop for now and happy to take questions.
Okay, thank you very much, Doctor. Thank you to sharing us your passion, very passionate. So what I can resume is that we have to change the mindset. We have to change the way or do the IP. We have to include it to the school for the childhood, in the childhood. We have to improve the rate of patents, because today is too down. And for that, we have to have another culture. In Africa, the culture is culture. But in Africa, the culture is not first the IP. So that's we are wrong of that. Yes, you are right, and Mr. Sand has really right on everything he has shared of us. We have to Africa is the land of innovation, of creation. People have to know that IP is not cost, it's investment. If you want to develop your firm, you have to do the IP first. You have to protect your ID, your project, your name, your mark, everything. And people have to know that it's about the raw material of agriculture. It's about the earth. It's about anything. And it's about in the continent and outside, because Africa is humanity, and humanity is anywhere. You have some African people in the 5 continents, and they have pattern to depose to the structure. But where? How many it costs? Which person can help them to do that? We don't know today. We don't have some session to train anybody to do that. But we have to make some creation. We have to improve that. We have to do the lobbying of that, because we are the first continent. We are the youngest continent in the humanity. Thank you. Mr. Sand, it's your turn.
Okay, thank you very much. Can we call on Mike? Mike has not given his first intervention.
Correct. Yes. Mr. Mike, are you still there?
Yes, I am.
Okay. Sorry, it's your turn to say. Go ahead, please.
Is there a question, or you want me to make a statement?
It's not a question.
Okay. So maybe just to give a little bit of background of What I'm involved in, and it's more so around digital content online, with quite a number of years in music and now working in film, with ambitions to do further other types of content as well, using our own technology. I think the biggest thing that I'm working on in the IP field at the moment is piracy. I did hear the former speaker. I can't say that I totally agree that piracy is sometimes right and piracy is sometimes wrong. Piracy is wrong, full stop. We have to also remember the organizations behind piracy. The organizations behind piracy are organized criminals. Piracy funds child trafficking. Piracy funds human trafficking. Piracy funds arms dealing. Piracy funds drug running as well. So, you know, yes, it's true that music industry and film industry did use piracy to their advantage, but the question should also be asked that if we did at the time have strong enough enforcement, strong enough, number one, regulations, and number two, enforcement of those regulations, would the consumer still not have bought the content anyway at the end of the day? You know, if you give the consumer a choice between free pirated content and content that they need to pay for, of course they're going to go for free. But if you can take out the free option and have a reasonably priced, fully accessible original content where the creator is also compensated for their work, then is that not a better scenario? Do we not also see growth? I don't believe piracy is the reason why Nollywood succeeded. The reason why Nollywood succeeded is because of the content in the movies that the population related to. So I still think that under a regulated system, Nollywood would have succeeded and be probably in a more sustainable situation right now. I deal with filmmakers every day, and I know there's a lot of filmmakers who are struggling in Nollywood because of piracy. And it really needs to be sorted out quickly by the Nigerian government. Thankfully, and I understand that the next copyright amendment is currently under debate. But on the good side, when piracy went from physical to digital, we now actually have a better way of managing piracy. It's actually become a lot easier in the digital space. And this comes down to the responsibilities of the internet service providers. So the Kenya Copyright Amendment Act 2019 has a piece of game-changing legislation that I hope the rest of Africa will adopt. Kenya, as far as I'm aware, is the first country to adopt website blocking of sites that infringe copyright and sites that also enable that infringe copyright, and sites that also enable piracy, including stream ripping sites. One of the biggest, because YouTube, for example, is not encrypted, the content is not encrypted, we all have seen and probably used YouTube downloaders innocently. But what we know about that is that is also a source of piracy. You rip a piece of content that's, and then you go beyond your personal use and you share it. Especially music has been infringed up to, I think, about 38%. In Kenya, IFPI has measured about 38% of copyright infringed. Piracy has been through stream ripping sites. So thankfully, we have a piece of legislation in Kenya that is game-changing. We are currently in the process of rolling that out and having it enforced. And it's very simple. I think we've all traveled to countries that have censorship, countries that have state-owned internet service providers where you can't access particular sites. It's the same technology. The ISP would, using a properly organized framework and a properly organized system of takedown notices from those who have been infringed, the ISPs would block a customer's access to a domain or a subdomain where a piece of infringed content is sitting either for free, and as we know, there's nothing for free in this world. When you go and download a piece of pirated content, that same site is stealing your data. That same site is opening you up to identity theft. That same site, through the content, is delivering you a piece of malware that can actually shut down your device or steal all your data and sell it, or all of the above. I was actually in a cyber security presentation yesterday, and that has been well documented with enough examples. So where that content is free, or where that content is on sites that are generating advertising around that content, the creators of that content are not getting anything. So we're able to block access. I lead a coalition called Partners Against Piracy, and we are local and multinational companies and associations representing creatives from film, television, and music, and hopefully digital books, audio books, and the like. Every source of, and gaming, every source of digital content. So it's very important that this law is rolled out into other countries and enforced. It is very easy relative to having to enforce physical piracy, which in the past involved government agencies who could be, let us just say, compromised. And, so enforcement was very difficult on physical piracy. But with digital piracy, it just needs the buy-in from the internet service providers, and each country probably has no more than 5 to 10 ISPs. So it's very easy with the right legislation to make sure that we block a customer's access to illegal content. And then that way, the same customer who still wants the same content, be it local or international, will then find a legal means of accessing that content, and either for a free ad-supported service like YouTube, for example, or subscription services like Showmax and Netflix and Roku, or transactional services like My Movies Africa, for example, which is our organization. So they can find a legal alternative, they can find the money to pay for the legal alternative, and that then puts billions of dollars back into the creative economy. That will attract investment, both foreign and local, and that will create a lot of jobs for Africa's unemployed youth, be it in terms of working for these organizations, and working for the content creator, or creating content themselves, or all the wider community that services the content creation industry. So it's a very simple thing to do. We just need government will, and we just need the creatives in Africa to get behind this and try and roll this out in as many countries as possible.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mike. What I can resume is that we are talking about movies, but there are still unmade worker, and there are still intellectual property. They have to know that. So we have to improve. Our African state have to change the legislation about the IP, and they have to work about the tariff barrier, the cost that is cost to submit a file, an IP file. And now I will talk again. I will let Mr. Son to resume and to conclude. Yeah. And I would
just like to clarify, I'm not just talking about movies, I'm talking about all digital content. And as far as I know, the registration of copyright in most countries is, if not free, very affordable. And also you don't need to register to enforce it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for your clarification.
You're welcome.
Okay, thank you very much, Marian, for overseeing this this session. Some of us can't even speak our local, which is a shameful thing though, but you can communicate in English and as far as in French, as some of our French is your mother language. I commend you for that. Some of us are worse off. So basically, my question will be opening up the Q&A time now, allowing people to intervene. So someone asks if the recording will be shared. Of course, it will be shared with us. Even the presentation will be shared. There's a Q&A session. You can type your questions there. We can then take it up from there. So I will also allow Beverly to also handle this session. But
yes.
I want to throw one question to the panelists. And I think this goes to Simba. This year alone, what have you done? And this will also, we can take it in turn. What have we done to be able to ensure we can't always say, oh, they are using an indicator or a parameter that were not the way it was negotiated. So that is the indicator. We are innovating, we are changing life, but how is it translating to changing life and money in the bank of the inventors? We are still having, example is this, we're still having serious issue on the power of, on the area of electricity. How has innovation changed this? Is it because lack of enforcement that is making people not to do it, or not to invent way of even protecting us? If we keep on giving an excuse that, oh, we innovate in our own level, we're talking about innovating not just to serve your immediate need, but as well as commercializing and engaging in global community. We cannot isolate ourselves from this. If we keep on giving the excuse, we will keep on remaining where we are, and the inflow of investment will still be there. We may not have an African brand that is global. We just have an African brand that is local and that is domestic. So either we choose to innovate, create an enabling environment for this, and compete in a global world, then we remain where we are. We have a choice. So I just want to this question, going back to the question. What have you done and what have you seen in Africa this year? Let's say, yes, we have moved from point A to point B. Thank you. And this goes to all the panelists though. And sorry,
thank you so much.
Before you respond, I also agree with Mike. Piracy is bad. Yes, we might give kudos to Nollywood. Nollywood step on piracy and went global, because people started pirating Nollywood and started creating what would I call it? They started engaging celebrity because they've seen it from pirated movie. But those guys were still not able. They were not able to even pay for their transport, pay for their rent. We know them, but now they start going to Netflix, start protecting that they have more money. So maybe it might work for some, but I think majority will suffer if we don't have an enabling environment.
It's my turn? Okay.
Simba.
Okay, thank you so much, Send. Look, in terms of your question, I mean, you raise quite a number of pertinent issues, but I would speak to what we have done in probably two organizations that I'm involved in, because I also personally believe that each and every African has a responsibility and to at least work and continue carving in their own niche for the benefit of the continent. So number one, I hope we all understand the political systems, especially of most of the African countries. We do have the executive, we have the legislature, and most of these issues that we are discussing here, they center around the respective legislation and laws in different African countries. So number one, there's an issue of political will that has been raised. It's a very critical one. And I was recently appointed, I'm involved in the International Panel of Legislators Advancing African IP, which currently has more than 250 parliamentarians, from more than 20 parliaments across Africa. What this organization is doing is changing the approach in terms of improving the IP system, of the continent. Because what we have had, I remember you mentioned the TRIPS agreement and other international conventions. But if you look back, you might find that some of the people or the politicians who were involved in signing specific international agreements might not have had a full understanding of what it meant for the country. So what this organization is doing is to capacitate parliamentarians, is to create IP awareness among parliamentarians across the continent, such that when they are in parliament, when IP issues are being debated, they are spot on, they are sharp, right? When those international conventions or agreements are being debated on whether or not they will benefit countries, they will be spot on. So that's what the International Panel of Legislators Advancing African IP is doing and working towards, to make sure that those who are involved in making the laws are aware of intellectual property issues. So that's the difference. So if you look at the example of Nigeria, look at the current Patent Act. How old is it? Does it even speak to the current world and the rate at which technology is moving? Definitely not. But for those changes to be made swiftly, we need the rightful people. I wouldn't say the rightful people per se, but we need people who are aware and who appreciate, because I do believe IP awareness is not enough to get value out of it. We need to go to the appreciation stage. The appreciation stage will allow us to act. So that's what we have been doing from an IPLA point of view. And like the moderator introduced, I'm the founder of All Things IP Africa. And what we have been doing for the past year, All Things IP Africa is that marketplace that opens up the African continent when it comes to IP service providers. So we are promoting IP attorneys and lawyers in general in Africa to be accessible by the global market, and of course within the continent. So those are some of the measures, but I still believe that the strong point in terms of the continent making that difference are the people who are the policymakers, the people who are involved in making the laws, because sometimes it's those very same laws that discouraging innovation. From where I am, I've learned about what is called innovative legislating, where when they make laws, they actually look at innovation. They actually look at what is happening on the ground and how can the law improve that. Then if we look at that aspect of legislation, it becomes very critical. And that's what we have also been doing.
Okay, thank you so much, Simba, for your additional comments.
I'm not sure. Beverly, I think your network is, I think she's having network issue. We can't really hear you. Okay, maybe let me step in now. And okay, Dr. Titi, I think Dr. Titi Layo, can you hear me all right? Okay. So can you, okay, so this is Africa. This is Africa. We have been on this for almost a year now. I want to hear your view on the compulsory licensing, COVID-19, because these are some of the issues. There's an intellectual party component of the vaccine. So where do you think Africa is, and what has Africa been doing since this year to be able to ensure we address this? Is a town hall meeting. We can always disagree and agree, and also just provide solution on how to move forward. So next year we'll come again and gauge if what we said or what we thought or recommend has taken any shape, or it just remains the same. Thank you. You have the floor now.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. San. And I just wanted to start by clarifying that I totally agree that piracy is wrong in all its forms and shapes. So let's just put that out there for the record, that piracy is wrong and should be sort of prohibited, and all culprits should face the law, because there is no instance where piracy should be encouraged because of detrimental effects that it has on industries. Although we saw somewhat of a different trajectory in Hollywood, but that's an example. That's not endorsing piracy in any way, and that's not endorsing the system. Also, I think Professor Funmi Arewa wrote a brilliant piece on this, and we also have some other research. Professor Chidi Ogwamanam wrote a piece on Nollywood as well, and it just explains to us how Nollywood sort of developed even at its initial stages of copyright. So I would say that we are not in any way endorsing piracy in copyright or any other type of intellectual property. We're just sort of mentioning how the industry grew, even though we did not have strong intellectual property systems in Nigeria. So I just wanted to clarify that and agree with the other panelists about sort of the state of piracy. Now, with regard to COVID-19, I would say it's complex, and it's a conversation that, you know, I think African countries, African governments need to deeply engage with. So just as a preface, at the initial point of the COVID-19 outbreak around the world, Nigerian lecturers were on strike. They were at home because there were questions about government paying salaries and about just some of the ASU issues that were raised at the point. That is the time when researchers, academics all over the world were working around the clock on developing vaccines. And at that time, our university lecturers, for example, in Nigeria, that's just an example, were on strike. We have world-class, excellent scientists in Nigeria, but we have limited infrastructure with regard to research and development. So that's one starting point. Actually, if we look at some of the conversations that we've had, intellectual property rights have not been enforced with regard to COVID-19 therapeutics, vaccines, medicines. So intellectual property rights are not I know that we've had the call for waivers of intellectual property rights led by India and South Africa, but we've not seen any company suing anyone for intellectual property rights infringements with regard to the development of vaccines and therapeutics. And there has been a culture, an open culture of sharing of knowledge across board, right? So the question is going to be about manufacturing capacity in Africa. What is our manufacturing capacity with regard to the creation of vaccines? So a lot of test data information has been shared publicly. We can produce generic versions of, many countries around. India is producing its own versions. Russia, many countries are producing their own versions of vaccines that have been found to be effective. So in Africa, why don't we have our own versions, right? Intellectual property per se has not limited the creation of vaccines. So the question is going to be about what have we done to develop our own So it's been ongoing now for, over 18 months. So how effective has our research and development been on the continent? And then we also have questions about vaccine imperialism. We have capitalist philanthropy. We have questions about the limitations of access to vaccines as a result of, these former colonial authorities that are at the forefront of, developing the vaccines, therapeutics, and medicines, and they're prioritizing. There's health nationalism. They're prioritizing the health of their own countries, right? So they are securing second booster doses for their countries. They have maybe 2 or 3 times the supply needed for the whole countries. And then they are sending excesses of their supplies to Africa. So we see the United States, for example, we see Canada, we see the UK, that they have supply needed for all their population, first, second booster doses, all in reserve. And then they're sending excesses. We see COVAX, the WHO COVAX platform that has been created. So the question really is going to be first manufacturing capacity for our countries, and then the second is now going to be about international solidarity. How are we going to ensure, because we know that if one country, we're as good as the weakest link. Countries that have high numbers of unvaccinated populations are going to have different sort of strains of this virus replicated because they don't have sort of the appropriate vaccines for their population. And we see that example from Southern Africa. Nigeria also claims that it had the Omicron version, way before in October, because it has a high level of unvaccinated people. And I think the research, the science has shown us that where you have high populations of unvaccinated people, you're going to have more variants. So I would say that, first of all, we need to think internally on the continent. Compulsory licenses, yes. So we can use the compulsory license, but then do we have the domestic manufacturing capacity for us to utilize the compulsory licenses? Or are we going to import from the countries generic? So is it going to be a South-South collaboration, for example, from India? But why can't we develop our own generic versions of these? So compulsory license is there, the tool is available for us to use, but what are our own scientists' responses? How have we sort of invested in our research and development? This is the point where the African Union and all countries need to invest in the capacity of our scientists and our manufacturing. So we see how many drugs are being produced in Nigeria or in any other African country. That's one big question for us to ask. Some countries have a higher manufacturing capacity, but then how are we sharing continental sort of exchanges with our information, research and development? How are we sharing? Because that's what we can do, especially with the platform of the AFCFTA that we have now. And we're building our African regional sort of integration. That's what we should share. That's what we should be sharing. So I wouldn't, I think talking about vaccine imperialism, talking about, capitalist philanthropy, talking about health nationalism, those are issues that are external because that is what these governments are doing. However, we should remember human rights, our fundamental international human rights, and the place of solidarity, international solidarity, because of the interconnectedness of us all, of the globe, right? You have a variant coming from a continent that is spread across. If you look at the research in Scotland, for example, because we have lots of research in sort of the variants, we can see the number of cases, but some countries do not have that capacity of sort of the gene technologies. That doesn't mean they don't have the variants already, because people are traveling and that is spreading the different variants across the continent. So I think there is a place. So even though we might acknowledge some of the limitations of our manufacturing capacity and sort of our government intervention with regard to funding research, funding and investing in research and development on the continent, which is paramount at this moment, we should then counterbalance that with the role of international solidarity, where countries need to break down the silos of nationalism that they have created and please help in supporting and sending vaccines all around to, global South countries that really need them. Because, if one country is not safe, the rest of the world is not safe.
Wow, and thank you very much, Dr. Titi. If one country is not safe, the rest of the countries, the continents are not safe. Thank you very much, Beverly. So maybe Gary, okay, Gary, go ahead, please. You have the floor. Okay. By the way, there's a question. There's a question in the Q&A session that says, Gary?
I can check that. Okay, so we've got, sorry, because my connection is back on, so I'll take over if that's okay. So just moving into the Q&A. I'll just read out some of the questions. So we have one from Muhammad Tukur Arabi, and he asks, how can the generality of the SMEs benefit from the protections of the IPs of their creations, I think he's saying, innovations. This problem is found all over Africa. So who would like to take that question? Simba, can I come to you?
Sure. Thanks so much for the question. I think in my initial submission, I mentioned what India is doing, a template that can actually be used by African countries. Because you see, we always have this content and that message that SMEs are the backbone of our economies. We say that over and over again. But the question is, what are we doing for them? So you find that the example that I've given you from a practice point of view, where the cost of IP protection is mainly based on more than 90% of clients who are international clients and not local SMEs. The local SME cannot afford that. So which technically means if they want to do IP protection, the first point is they are shut out by the costs. But however, the Indian government, having realized that, what they actually created was a plan and a fund where they are saying we are taking care of the professional fees, of the costs that are associated with IP protection for SMEs. What they are simply doing is paying official fees, that's the statutory fees. What that has done, it has changed the statistics of IP protection in India in a huge way, be it patents or trademarks, and they've also facilitated expedited protection of IP. So if we look at the current, again, regional systems that we do have, the time that it takes for you to get a patent, 3 to 5 years, probably 6 in some cases, it won't make sense for an SME to have like the kind of innovation that they have. Sometimes the lifespan is very short. So SMEs have to be considered from a policy point of view, where they are assisted in terms of protecting IP. That will be the best way to take them off from where they are currently now.
We lost. Okay. I was enjoying his interventions, but I'm just going to call Jerry quick. Simba, are you back? Are you back now?
You were when I was off.
Oh, was it me?
Yeah, it was you.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, so again, on that question, I think I will pick up on where I was heading when my internet disappeared. I think that on top of government coming up with interventions like the one in India, which is actually very novel, I think we as a civil society have a big role to play in this. And the example I was giving when I got cut off was about how we lobbied government to increase funding for a creative industry-related parastatal or state corporation. And I think, okay, that time I was in government, but I think if we look at ourselves as civil society, and then we look at how other civil society goes about doing their work, like in the human rights field, you won't even wait for, you already have these organizations that are taking up cases on, extrajudicial killings and, human rights abuses all over. As in we already have organizations that have set up and they're just waiting for things to happen and they will take action. As in they have objectives, they have resources, they have personnel who are on standby to deal with arising issues in that human rights field. In Kenya, Article 40 of our constitution says that intellectual property are part of our fundamental rights. So in Kenya, intellectual property rights are covered under our Bill of Rights. So for me, that means that And then the same constitution says that the state has a responsibility towards promoting, protecting the intellectual property rights of Kenyans. So I'm thinking that we haven't even challenged government on some of these provisions in our own laws. Like, what does it even mean to say that the state should protect or promote intellectual property rights? For me, the issues that Mohammed is raising could, arguably fall under part of the protection that the government or the state is supposed to provide to owners of IP in the in SMEs, which is now going back to what the government of India is doing. And if the government of India can do this, then we too can do it. Again, on the issue of advocacy, I feel like we have all the information, and we know just how important intellectual property is to the life of an economy of any nation. But I feel like the information is just there. I think we haven't organized ourselves, from that civil society, advocacy and lobbying perspective to take this information and make sure that it is shouted from the rooftops and that the necessary people get to hear. And by necessary people, I include citizens in every country. I include government officials, so that when this information is made well known to everybody, then it becomes easier for us to interact with it. Like, for instance, I was looking at the US, according to the US Bureau of Economic Analysis, the creative economy provides $919.7 billion in value add. That's $1 trillion, and supports 5.2 million jobs and represents 4.3% of the nation's economy. That's in the US, and that's just the arts. In South Africa, the creative industries contribute 3.05% to the economy. For me, this is mind-blowing. Like, this is really mind-blowing information, that this thing that is taken for granted around the continent is actually having this kind of impact in the economy. And I think it's high time we organize ourselves the way Sanba has organized himself in Nigeria. And he's dealing, at the continental level and also in Nigeria. But I think every country in Africa, we really need to start organizing around these ideas, but from an advocacy perspective, so that we can start pushing for, change at the grassroots level, so that, this intellectual property can become meaningful to Kenyans. The same way as I said, like, if a human rights violation happens, you'll have a civil society organization rushing to court to seek orders, or, we need to, for it to become that practical. And if this is such good news for the economies of Africa, then we really need to, I think, prioritize and make this a very urgent issue for us as civil society practicing in this field of intellectual property. Thanks.
I please call on Mike Strano to offer his take as well.
Sure, yeah, what specifically?
Let's just take a look.
You're muted.
Oh, sorry.
Not hearing you.
No.
There we are.
Can you hear me now? I'm not muted.
Yes. It's the internet getting out. Sorry about that.
It's fine. Okay, so I'm going to just take another question from Mohammed, because he's put in quite a lot of questions.
Sure.
He talks about governments needing to re-strengthen, for instance, consumer protection councils, other agencies to protect IP of the creators, content creators, etc. And we've already addressed, and you in particular were very strong on piracy and sending that message that piracy under no circumstances should be viewed, there should be no soft approach. So in your opinion, what what can government do to help strengthen, because it's like a multifaceted approach, private sector, government, we all have to kind of work together. Enforcement is one of the things that we seem to be lacking here on the African continent. What do you think government could do better? And where it comes to the agencies themselves, again, how can gaps be filled between what the agencies are doing, what government is trying to do, and then what private sector? So I just want to take on the efforts being made so far, clearly not enough. What, in your opinion, would be a good stopgap, or what can we begin to do as members of all these various sectors? That might be a hard one, because I'm asking you to respond from the point of view of many sectors of society, but at least it's a step. What steps can we begin to take to protect our IP better, as well as raise this awareness that piracy is never acceptable?
Yeah, I think in short, to comment on government, the governments of Africa are not serious about the next industrial revolution, which is intellectual property. As we're on this call, I actually just did a quick Google search to find out, when was the first intellectual property law in the world ever come into force, and it was over 200 years ago. So this isn't new. It may be new for Africa, but it isn't new for the rest of the world. I mean, some of the first, actually it was earlier than that. Some of the earliest copyright was in the 1700s in Germany. So, actually in France, actually. So it's not new. I don't know why governments think it's new and they feel that it's difficult to understand. It's way overdue, potentially a century overdue. And we really want to, governments are talking about industrial revolution. They're talking about, everyone's talking about Africa rising and this, that, and the other thing. But I think governments need to start walking the talk, right? And really, and if they don't know, then, because unfortunately as well, most lawmakers in most governments across Africa are not in the generation that fully understands the creative industry as well. But I mean, I know IP has many facets as well in terms of patents and trademarks and what have you, but there just seems to be a poor lack of understanding. They understand tangible assets like real estate very easily, but why are we not having the same understanding of so-called intangible assets? Meanwhile, the rest of the world is going into meta, the rest of the world is going into NFTs. They're already going to next level, and we're still here talking about how to patent, how to trademark, how to protect copyright. Governments really need to get serious. Now, telling them to get serious on a webinar, is that going to work? No. So this is why, I agree with Jerry, as different sorts of societies, including this forum that we're already in, we need to become very active and very organized in lobbying. And we need to look, lawmaking is about lobbying and is about selling the benefits, right? So we really, and I also feel that the time for having a Nigerian copyright law and having a Kenyan copyright law and a South African copyright law, all very in the area that I work, and it's the same for IP. I think the time has come to make it harmonized, because I think if we do harmonize, we can move a lot faster. We can lobby our governments a lot faster as well. And just a case in point with PIPO as well, I did some research. It's the Pan-African Intellectual Property Office under the African Union. The last time I checked, it only had 6 countries who have gone the first step. I don't know if the first step is ratification. It's only 6 countries out of 55, and that's testament alone to show that African governments are not serious about IP. But do we need to wait for PIPO? I mean, I'm not someone who is in favor of waiting. Let's do stuff. Do we have to wait for PIPO to be up and running? No, but let's lobby for it to be done so. But meanwhile, let's, as private industry and as private policymakers, just keep pushing this agenda and let's even if laws aren't harmonized, let's still at least try and organize ourselves to see what we can do and to have a coordinated, prioritized lobbying approach. You know, we're not going to get all 55 countries at once, but let's at least look at the low-hanging fruits of the biggest markets that act as hubs in some of the other regions and act as role models for other countries to look up to. Let's get that right. Let's have a model law, for example. I understand there's a model law for, I was told the other day there's a sponsored model law for tariff barriers that was done under the AFCFTA. Why can't we have a model law for intellectual property to quickly harmonize as much as possible? Let's take the best practice in each of those countries. You know, if we find Kenya has a good law on anti-piracy, for example, let's model that. If we find South Africa has a good one on CMOs, let's model that. And let's get a model law together and try and roll it out very quickly, get it supported by the AU, get it supported by the various development banks as well. I do a lot of work with the Fragmented Bank. I was a co-producer of Canex in Durban. My organization was 3 weeks ago. And they're very interested in the creative industry. But I told them bluntly, if you want to loan money to the creative industry, you're not going to get any of it back unless you help us deal with piracy. You know, so let's also just be practical and pragmatic. Let's just stop talking about, yes, this is a great industry to get into. Yes, get into it, but help us deal with some of the issues as you are getting into it, so it becomes sustainable for everyone.
Great, thank you so much. Really great intervention.
Thank you.
At this point, is there anybody else that has further questions before I hand back to Sand for the closing remarks? Mohammed, I just want to say a very big thank you, because your Q&A, your questions really, okay, he's got one more question. Where in Nigeria can one join in the fight of IPs? Okay, I think what he means is perhaps can one participate in, I suppose, policy making, because a fight has to be strategic. It's not just a blind fight. We have to know what we're fighting for. So I suppose better IP rights, the copyright bill for starters. So maybe Sand, you might want to take that one.
Okay, yeah, so we have a number of platforms. Thank you very much, Beverly, for moderating this session. And then thank you very much, my co-panelists. I'll call them title chiefs or title elders in this town hall meeting. Thank you very much for the intervention. I think Tuka, we have a platform which, of course, we can add you on the African IP Center platform. We have two actually, so we can add you one. I think you receive an email requesting for your number if you want to be part of it. We'll add you. It's a continental level one. We also have some African level one, which we can still add you. Yeah, there are a number of platforms we can add you where you can advocate and be part of the movement. I think Abimbola raised her, is it her hand or his hand? I don't know. Abioye. If you want to speak, maybe the technical people can unmute you before I give my closing remark. If that is not, if it was a mistake, that is fine. Okay. Okay, can you unmute him or her? Or she, okay, go ahead, you've been unmuted.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. I very much appreciate the contributions of the various panelists, and I must commend the organizers of this event. Intellectual property is a very big issue, and especially for players on the software side. Okay, in the music, video, and what have you, they have seen a whole lot of piracy, and they are fighting that. And I think the law is quite clear on that, and the enforcement appears to be strong. But in the software side, you see people doing, in fact, openly infringing on your intellectual properties and pirating your software, put it in a different form, different language, and you see your ex-employees, you know, competing with you with your intellectual property. And yet these solutions are copyrighted, you know, and the legal system is slow to catch up, and a lot of practitioners are not really, they are not well trained or learned enough on intellectual property matters. Okay, and they see these things and say, oh, it's just like one person moving from one organization to another organization and doing what he was doing in this organization in another organization. And but the bottom line is that your intellectual property have been violated, and the law appears to be weak. The people that will enforce whatever is even strong on the law have not much knowledge of what it is. Okay, so how are we going to improve on that? I think governments need to train the intellectual property judges or people that are in those environments and other law enforcement agencies to be able to properly handle these cases. You know, there is a particular case we refer to WIPO, and I tell you the way everything was being handled, there is really no protection for innovation in Africa. That is just the bottom line there. But I don't know whether some speakers can help on that. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much. Can you please tell us your organization you represent or where you're calling from? So
okay, yeah, my name is Bimba Abioye. I'm Group Managing Director of Fintrack Software. We are based in Nigeria.
All right, thank you very much. You see, this issue of software, I don't know, Beverly and some people on this platform were part of this working with governments, helping the government put enable environment for GI in Nigeria. And I talked about while we are making this law, proposing this law, we should also think about AI. They laughed AI in Nigeria. We've never taken care of this, but we must be futuristic in our planning and our policy making. We can't just think about now. We think about tomorrow, next year, our generation yet on board. By so doing, we'll be able to create enabling environment for 2-3 generations. We can't create for just ourselves and nobody else. I think with software, and we see this issue, we only take software piracies about Microsoft or other software application. Now the chicken has come home to roast because we are also creating software locally. How do we protect this? We don't have enough time, but I think we might be able to draw the curtain now, and then we'll hope for next year. So I open the now floor for Beverly to carry on.
Okay, thank you very much, Sam. Thank you so much. And it's been a really, really engaging discussion. We've actually even gone 30 minutes over because there's been so many wonderful interventions, and there's been a lot of pragmatism, as well as, you know, we're not here to just have a talk shop. There have been some very realistic solutions proffered, and I do like the fact that SAND, Africa IP, has also been tasked with the role to do more as well, to, I would say, maybe raise the awareness, because I mean, if I just do a quick recap, some of the issues that have come out have been data, you know, poor data. We don't have a good repository. How do we know how many registrations, you know, occur on an annual basis? Clearly, research and development budgets are poor. We're not spending not even a fraction as much as we ought to be spending. And I believe that was Simba that brought that point across. You know, if all African countries set aside just 1% of their GDP, imagine the enormous traction we would make. Because again, he made that link between IP, R&D, IP, innovation, and R&D. It stems from the R&D. So if we're not doing enough on the R&D side, naturally, we're not going to get that much needed output. Okay, we've talked a lot about, I believe it was my co-moderator that said, we should begin to treat IP as an investment and not a cost center. Our approach and our attitudes and our perceptions of IP so far have been, somewhat, I don't need it yet, I don't need it now, put it aside, it's a cost. But if we begin to look at it as an investment, it's an intangible asset that actually has its own space on your profit and loss. It forms part of your assets. When we begin to look differently at IP, perhaps more creatives, innovators, founders will begin to pay closer attention. And when they do, that traction which we need to generate new policies will then come. Because if we're not getting enough participation, then naturally, there's not going to be any push or pressure on the legislators to push to pass these laws. Again, Doctor mentioned that it's necessary to connect all the different stakeholders, the academics, the policymakers, civil society organizations. We all have a part to play in moving IP in Africa forward. It's not the role of just the legislators. It's not the role of just the policymakers. All of us have a part to play in this. So, a big kudos to Africa IP, All Things Africa, and all of you for coming together to show that this is a very important topic, and we're not and we want to see change. We want to see those big numbers that we have in China, in Asia, in the US. We want to see those numbers here. It's certainly not for lack of innovation. As again my co-moderator said, Africa is the land of creativity, raw creativity, talent, and passion, but somehow it's not being translated. So how do we create a system that works sincerely for us? The current system, although someone in the comments, Catherine Abo, says that she believes a country like Nigeria has an adequate system, but enforcement is our issue. But perhaps we may need to pay closer attention and maybe review our systems, because if the system is not capturing majority of the founders and creatives, then it shows that there are still gaps that need to be addressed. We talked about manufacturing capacity, another brilliant intervention that was made by Doctor concerning Africa's role to play in the fight against the COVID-19. Africa has unfortunately lagged behind in the development of vaccines. Again, is it because we don't have the labs? Is it because we don't have the minds? We do, but our manufacturing capacity needs to be there. I believe Mike Strano also alluded to this as well. When manufacturing capacity is raised, it can then cope with the innovative outputs. But if our manufacturing capacity is not addressed, simple things like infrastructure, electricity. In fact, one thing we didn't really talk about perhaps today is favorable tax incentives. That's probably for another day, because this is such a voluminous topic. Having a favorable legislative policy that enables people to produce these to produce new IP, and they don't have to be charged for it perhaps maybe 1 or 2 years down the line. So we need tax incentives to enable people, to incentivize people to keep producing. Otherwise, if they feel they're going to be charged, if they feel it's only going to increase their obligations, then they'll end up going underground. How do we get more innovators above ground? How do we capture these people? I mean, we talked about so much today. We talked about India. That was Simba again. There were just so many good contributions and interventions. I think another thing I see today is a lot of people want to join Africa IP. And also I believe Simba talked about All Things Africa IP being a repository for IP practitioners in Africa. How do we all connect? How does someone in Nigeria connect with someone in Kenya? How do IP practitioners from different countries connect? So I'm going to throw that back to, I would say, Sand and Simba, just to, touch on how can people from today join Africa IP. I've already said that they should leave their WhatsApps, but some people say they're not on WhatsApp. So Sam, very quickly, how can you join Africa IP? And then maybe Simba can just address All Things Africa as a repository for African IP practitioners. So I'll throw that back to you.
Okay, thank you very much, Beverly. So just a quick one, because we've really used our time and we have to be that conscious of time. So if you're not on WhatsApp, please get on WhatsApp. It doesn't really take, maybe you just have to just wait. However, if we can still communicate via email, what WhatsApp does is this: it connects. Simba is in Zimbabwe. He's in Dubai. We talk like as if we are just like next door. So that's what WhatsApp has done for us. Merrily, the same thing. When she was in Ghana, she was telling me, I'm in Ghana, and she moved from Ghana to another country. When she came from France, we're communicating. Mike, every day we communicate. Almost everybody on this platform, we use that WhatsApp platform to communicate, to share ideas. That is what technology has done for us. So I will encourage whoever is not on WhatsApp to get to WhatsApp. But that is a platform we use to reach out to one another every day, at least for now. Maybe tomorrow we can move to other platform, but I think WhatsApp for now, get a WhatsApp number. But if you have an email, you can send an email. Surely, from next year, you will have more of this weekly or monthly webinar we'll be having to engage on issues and make recommendations. We'll make a recommendation from this. We'll send to AU. We'll send to the government of Nigeria. If Gary or Mike wants us, we can also send a copy. They can also send it to Kenya government. So for now, that is a platform we'll have the WhatsApp platform. We can share the link. Okay, yeah. So maybe Yinka can share the link. One of the technical people can share the link. They can just join from there. Thank you. Oh, Simba, over to you. 1 minute. We have to go.
Thank you so much. Yes, definitely. We have to run. From an All Things IP Africa point of view, what we are simply doing is to make sure that all the legal practitioners or IP practitioners across Africa are accessible to the world. So ours is a platform. Ours is a marketplace that is exposing IP practitioners from various African countries to the global market, and of course, making sure that they are also connected within the continent. That's what we are doing, but I'll just drop the link on the chat so that people can quickly see and go to the platform. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Okay, so it looks like we've come to the end. It's been a really engaging session. You will agree with me. And please make sure you follow All Things IP Africa, and of course, make sure you join Africa IP. I'm Beverly, your co-moderator. Muriel, I'll let you also say your make your closing statement as well.
Okay, thank you, Beverly. Thank you to all of us. And we have to say in our mind that Africa is the future. Africa is the emergent continent. Africa is the high-level technology. Africa is satellite data. We are the first, and we will stay the first. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Beverly.
I'm good. Thank you very much. And Merry Christmas in advance, and compliments of the season to you all. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Take care all. Bye-bye. Thanks, Jerry. Bye.
Bye.